The following podcast is brought to you by the Arthur Miller Society. Please visit us at arthurmillersociety.net for more information.
That is a $1 million idea.
I always like to use the big issue in the literature to have students connect with their lives.
Hi, welcome to the second episode of the Arthur Miller Society podcast. My name's Kieran Leinster, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Ambika Singh. Ambika, how are you?
I'm great, Kieran. How are you?
I'm excellent, thank you. It's great to have you on board. And where are you speaking from?
I'm speaking from home in India, Jaipur, Rajasthan.
Well, it's great to have you on board, and I think if there's one positive we can take from this pandemic, it's that these kind of conversations are now so much more normalised, with me in Dublin, you in India, and our guests, hopefully, from all over the world. And for today's episode, we are going to be speaking to Jan Balakian about her life and career teaching the works of Arthur Miller and much more.
Jan Balakian was educated at Bucknell University, Brown and Cornell, and teaches literature and writing at Kean University. She's published essays on American drama, interviews with Arthur Miller and Wendy Wasserstein, a cultural studies book about the plays of Wasserstein, written 2 prize-winning screenplays, and hosted the first international conference at Kean entitled Why American Plays Matter. The conference was funded by the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. Jan's 1989 student play won Cornell's Playwriting Prize and contained the seeds for Dreams on Fire, written with her grandmother's inspection ticket by her side. Dreams is the first American play to tell the story of the Armenian genocide and the transmission of trauma in the context of college students, set before the 2016 election.
In 2008, Jan published a note on teaching Death of a Salesman in the Arthur Miller Journal, and this year published a chapter on teaching All My Sons in Arthur Miller for the 21st Century, edited by David Palmer and Stephen Marino. We began by asking how teaching has changed during her career and about her experiences teaching on Kean's general education program.
The theory rush happened when the late 80s, early 90s. And that was the big shift. But I have to say, I am painfully resistant to change, which is a negative. And so I was really doing kind of old-fashioned, old historicism and new criticism. But I was interested mostly in locating Miller's work in a historical context. But the big shift was the whole theory thing. And most of my classmates in graduate school were doing, high feminist theory. And so that was the big shift. Now what I'm noticing in teaching is we're admitting more students who come with weaker backgrounds. So that's a challenge. I was grading writings on the Inferno last night, and there out of, 25 students, I would say there are about 5 students who have trouble putting a sentence together. So I think that happens at a really early level. And I'm guessing those students did not have the education they should have had in grammar school. So that's what I'm noticing. The theory thing, I was teaching because I was determined to learn it, our theory, critical approaches course. And then that was taken over by theory specialists. So I'm not doing that currently. I'm doing more literature and dramatic literature. We have a general education program, and that I kind of love it. It's both a challenge, and it's a great thing, and it's also a struggle, because that course, it goes from Homer to the present in one semester. And it's a great challenge because of the breadth, but also because you get gym teachers, business majors, accountants. Everyone has to take it who has a pulse, basically. We get older students, we get, single moms. I mean, the majority still is 18 to 22. I actually like that. And what I'm thinking about and trying to do actually in recent years is make that GE Great Books course even more general in terms of teaching it thematically. So, a unit on choice, a unit on mental health. I'm thinking of doing a unit on genocide. So that's so our university really serves the community. It's not a community college; it's a 4-year university, but the collection of students has become more like adult education.
And following on from that, how much do you need to vary your methods from class to class?
I don't vary them. I do the same. Well, the GE class, the Great Books class, I use the same methods that I use even in some of the upper level classes. I suppose the only difference would be in the upper level classes, I have them read critical essays about the literature, which I tried to do in the GE class, but we usually don't have time, and it's not really that appropriate for those students. So I would say most of my classes are student-centered, and what I've learned to do is I take essays that I've written and I break them down into discussion questions, and I assign those discussion questions to each student. And I'm glad to say, I'm happy that in this remote teaching age, I've been able to continue that method remotely, because I'll just insert those discussion questions in the discussion box in Blackboard, and then students present in each class. And that way they're doing more of the thinking, because I'm afraid to know what goes on behind the screen. If I were speaking, I think students would be in the shower. They would be, walking their dogs, who knows? So keeping them on task and actively engaged is critical. And that's what I do in all levels.
I've had students this year knitting in class. I've had someone get their lunch delivered by their parents about 2 minutes into the class. So
oh yeah. And for young folks like you, all I can say is I still take it personally. I think, I must be doing something wrong. But after a certain point, you realize that, you bring to the table what you can, and it's up to the students to follow through from their end. And so don't take it too personally.
That naturally leads us to our next question, which is about this shift to virtual teaching. So do you see any advantages particularly to this shift to the virtual teaching platforms? And do you have any specific tips and tricks that you use to engage students and to use the same methodology that you would use in an offline class?
Right. So as I was saying, that
we can certainly benefit from your knowledge.
No, I'm afraid that your generation is ahead of me on tech. Those discussion questions have enabled me to continue my methodology that I use when we're face to face. The challenge is we're not allowed to force students to turn on their cameras for privacy reasons. So I never know truly what they're doing on the other side, but we have to focus on what we can control. So I would say use those. We're using Blackboard, so use the discussion boxes. I think they're supposed to be used for one question and having students respond back and forth to one question. I guess I see the point of that, but I like to have each student have their own question and then they post it. The challenge I've had is that I kind of grade them when they present. I give them credit for presenting. So I don't always go to that discussion board and regrade it, which is what we're supposed to do. The other thing that I did not do this semester that I think I'm going to try to do next semester is I did not adopt the 1,000-point system because coming off the semester, it just seems strange to have everything total 1,000 points and have one assignment worth 15 and another one worth 25. And it just felt strange to me. So I was grading the traditional either ABC or by 70, 80, 90. But I am seeing that students get anxious about their progress, which they can see on the Blackboard grading system. I would think they would keep the grades that you send them in email, but apparently they don't. So I'm going to try that method next time. Tactics or tips? I would say the main thing is keep them as engaged as possible with questions, presentations. I do, this is probably not novel, when we're doing Homer and Dante, I'll have them for a canto or a book. One student will bring in music, another student will bring in artwork that resonates with it. One student will do vocabulary and I'll do close reading exercises. So they seem to like that. Let's see, I'll give passages to some students. And I find always having passages as the anchor is helpful. So isolate a passage and then ask them selected questions. So that's, I found that for what we do, I think we're able to make the transition to online in a way that maybe a biology class could not do.
Yeah, definitely. I've got some of my students who are doing science as well, and they're a little bit lost. And I'm curious about, do you find it easier or more difficult to teach a work that you've done a lot of research on? When you're teaching, say, Miller or Wasserstein, is it difficult because you're more emotionally engaged?
I think the difficulty is in the volume of material, which then makes it more difficult to weed out the essentials for an introductory class or a student who's never encountered it before. I continue to struggle with how to prepare material that I've done a lot of research on, because you do have to strip it down, because what's relevant for a book is probably not always relevant for a student who's seeing the material for the first time. So it's stripping it down to its essentials.
Yeah, that's really important that we strip it down to the essentials so that it's important for their syllabus. Yes. And being researchers and professors can be quite challenging.
Yeah, I've often thought of proposing a session at MLA. I haven't been to MLA in ages. Have you?
No, not yet.
No, not yet.
Yeah.
That I kind of feel that, and I know this must sound like a nightmare to most professors, that the way we're trained in graduate school, which is to be very, very specialized, is actually just the opposite of what we're expected to do when we teach at a big state university that I'm teaching at. And I wish that I had a great books course in graduate school, and it would have. I mean, as it turns out, you end up self-teaching when you start your new job anyway. But I just find that being so specialized is not what's helpful for teaching. So what's helpful for scholarship obviously is not helpful for teaching. And I'm sure I'm not the first one to note that, but that's just my own.
Yes,
we both agree on that.
Yeah, I think it's backwards. It's backward. Yeah.
Almost all professors would complain that their millennial students don't read enough. They're lousy readers. So how do you characterize the reading habits of your students currently?
Well, my sense is they probably are grabbing the Spark Notes and all of that. Yeah, I think it's the rare few, like out of 80 students this semester, I think I might have a handful who are readers and the rest are not. And so your question is, how do I characterize the reading habits? Yeah, they're more a visual culture. And I am astonished that there are those students who cannot understand what a sentence is or how it's punctuated. I would say out of 80, I have about more than I would like to know, 8 or 10 like that. So the reading habits, I guess that's what makes us essential. And that's why I like actually teaching in the GE program, even though I think they are mostly getting their reading from summaries and such.
Yeah, I always have to kind of be strict with my students that Spark Notes, Wikipedia, it's all out. But of course, it always turns up in the essays anyway.
Well, I actually tell them it's okay. I mean, they can read that stuff because at least they're reading something, right? But if they are reading that stuff, then they have to document it.
And kind of following on from that, how useful do you find film adaptation when you're teaching plays or novels? Do you think this kind of...
I rely on them. Yeah, absolutely. So what I do is with the discussion questions, I'll delegate the class in advance. And then they will come having prepped their question, and then I'll roll a film or scenes from a film, and then I'll pause when it's a student's question and turn to respond. And I find it helps them a lot to see it. It gives them a visual to pair with the reading that they should have done. So I rely heavily. And then the old exercise that I learned from June Schluter, my first year was at Lafayette College. She used to show various productions of a play. So what I do, for instance, when I teach Ibsen, I'll show, if we have time, 3 endings of A Doll's House. Now, I don't think that there are so many versions of Miller's work, but I'll show the Julie Harris, the Jane Fonda, the Claire Bloom, and then students write about the differences. And the lesson there is to have them see how a director is a close reader just as they are, and what are the differences from one production to the next, and how you can read the same scene in several different ways. So yeah, I find it hugely important.
Your teaching notes on Salesmen and All My Sons are indeed very helpful to young professors and teachers like ourselves. Okay. And I love how you describe all of these connecting the dots exercises to get students to research the cultural and historical context of salesmen. But after they understand this, how do you then make them to make the jump to textual analysis?
Mm-hmm. So once they do the historical research, then part of the writing exercise, which I actually write on a piece of paper, well, now electronically, is, okay, now link it to the scene. So that, if they understand who Al Smith is, we just did this exercise in Salesman, and they understand New Deal liberalism, then they can link it to the scene in which Willie is fired, and they can understand. And the way I see that scene, I'm sure others see it differently, is that Howard is one version of America, and Willie's asking him to be another version. And so that they once they understand the cultural context, then they can bring it to that scene. And so that's part of their exercise.
And when you ask questions like, how responsible is Willy Loman for his destiny, what kind of responses do you get? And do these tend to change in light of things like the 2008 crash or the current pandemic?
Sure. Well, a lot of our students at Kean come from families where someone has lost a job. Most of my students are working 1, if not 2 jobs to pay their tuition, which is affordable compared to a private university. So it's always a mix. It's interesting. I'm glad you reminded me of that question, because we just did it in Modern Drama Survey, and we did discuss the ending without that question. I think that, the students, some agree with Hap that Willie had the right dream, and some agree with Biff that he had all the wrong dreams. I think that once we discuss the fact that this is a social play and the fish is in the water and the water is in the fish has always been a helpful analogy for describing what a social play is, that they see it's kind of 50-50, that as we all are, we're shaped by our world, but then we make choices within that matrix. So I think that's usually how the conversation comes out.
And I think your answer is very relevant to my next question.
Okay.
In your essay on teaching All My Sons, you suggest we ask students if they can separate a person's decisions from their identity. What kind of answers do usually students come up with to questions like these?
It's interesting, because when I do Dante, we talk, I love the statement, you become what you choose. And students do conclude that you become what you choose. And you're reminding me that I should do, when I do the unit on choice, I'm even going to write this down, that maybe I pull a thread from Dante to Miller. And I actually have them, and I just had them do this, that write about a choice that either they have had to make or that they will have to make. And they write about it in terms of, if I did A, this would be the long-term outcome. If I did B, this would be the long-term outcome. So I'm probably unconventional. I always like to use the big issue in the literature to have students connect with their lives, so that I think once they do that writing assignment where they see how Joe Keller's decision shaped who he is, then they see how their decisions shape who they are. And so I guess my biggest successes have been less teaching scholarly and more teaching personally.
That's really interesting. And I'm just curious as well, do they enjoy opening up? Do students tend to really open up and talk about their lives and express themselves? Or do they like it?
These are usually more writing assignments. So they feel comfortable opening up on the page to me. I don't know I don't think they would feel as comfortable talking about it in class. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But usually these are private matters. And I kind of like that because I have notes from students saying I felt like this was therapeutic. So but not to say that then you disregard the text, but that you're kind of pulling the students into the big issues of the play or the reading through their own lives. So first you do the text, the close reading, and then I do the personal at the end. So what I usually have the academic portion as part one, like of an exam essay, and then the personal, which I use to bolster their grade if they haven't done so well on the academic. Yeah.
And
I'm not good enough of a disciplinarian, I have to say. But go ahead.
And so much of your piece on Salesman focuses on Miller's critique of contemporary American values. Do students still regard him, or at least the play, as acting as a critique, or has that changed over time as well?
I don't think it's changed because whatever happens to be going on at the time that we're reading it, usually the play speaks to it. Yeah, I mean, the exploitation of the worker and buying the wrong dreams and creating a narrative about yourself, these things are, I think, timeless.
When you were teaching Miller's very well-known plays, The Crucible, Salesman, how much do you need to struggle against students' preconceived notions of what the text is about? Because there is certainly a lot that they have already known via the popular media and via several other platforms. So how do you deal with their preconceived notions?
I don't know. I do it my way, and then they're welcome to bring to it what they know, of course. You do cringe when they grab onto the, American dream theme, and you realize that for some of them, there are misconceptions or misunderstandings. So I would say, don't worry about what their preconceived ideas. Just do it your way and let them come to it anew.
I agree. That's the best advice.
Yeah. And do you find it then difficult to get them to think in terms of class, as opposed to, or even alongside, identities such as race, gender, sexual orientation?
Not at all. But my students, because they are mostly from working class families, completely identify with class.
Okay, that's fantastic. That's great. I love to hear that because it's so opposed to my own experience so far.
Oh,
anyway.
Really?
Yeah. It's just not really part of the language.
I see. So you must be teaching. What university are you?
University College Dublin and Trinity. So just kind of.
Okay, so you have a more a wealthier student population.
Not especially wealthy, but it's just more that people just don't really think in terms of class.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's depressing, but it's the reality.
I just figured it was built into any society, but okay.
It should be.
A lot of Miller's later writing is not very well known amongst people and especially student communities. Do you ever get to teach some of Miller's lesser known plays such as Broken Glass or The Last Yankee to your students? Or you stick to the classics?
Yeah, I do the classics. I'm sure that some of my colleagues in the Miller Society teach the other new ones. I remember my moral dilemma as a young graduate student. Because you're supposed to say something new, quote unquote. My advisor at the time, Tony Caputi, was an old school new critic of drama. He suggested, just do it new, write on his new work, and I didn't find it compelling enough, so I decided to do the whole range from beginning to end. So I don't teach the new work. If I were to teach the new work, maybe Archbishop Ceiling, maybe Broken Glass.
I could see both.
I like the American Clock to teach the Depression.
Yes, definitely. And I love this. You're right that it's important to remind students that creative work cannot be reduced to a singular theory. I love this because you can always sense when students are trying to find the meaning, quote unquote, of a text. How do you work against this?
Well, class discussion pretty much solves that problem because each student will respond in a different way. And the Requiem and Salesman, too, is an example. So you get how many perspectives? Linda's, Charlie's, Biff's, Hap's, 4. So I guess that's the beauty of class discussion.
Because I find my students are so reluctant to disagree with each other. In class, at least. Oh, yeah. They're very, very, I don't know if they're polite or if they're nervous or if they just assume that if someone is speaking confidently, they must be right and everybody else is wrong.
I guess this semester our students engaged enough. I don't think students have trouble disagreeing.
My students disagree all the time, and that becomes a problem in the class sometimes.
Oh, no, that's great. So you must be, you both must be doing a good job one way or the other.
But sometimes it gets like if there are just too many students in the class, it becomes too chaotic, and then they get very angry sometimes.
They do. I think you should take that as a compliment because rather than ordering out lunch or knitting, you have them engaged. So I think that's great.
No, I've had that too. In the class.
You get everything. You really do. Yeah.
In 2008, you wrote that most of your students are the first to go to college in their families, and they hope that their diploma is their ticket to financial security. Therefore, many have chosen to become teachers. Do you think teaching is often considered a last resort for people? And if so, what are the results of this attitude?
Well, it's a good question because often we find that the weakest students are doing the teaching program in combination with English because they don't know what other major to choose. So you get the weakest when you really want the strongest. So my theory or thought has always been if we could turn America's priorities upside down, what would happen if you paid a school teacher what you pay, I'm not the first to say this, I'm sure, a Wall Street, hedge fund manager? You would get the very best. I don't know. I guess it's not possible to do that because education is not profit making. But I think the problem is, I don't know if maybe it's the last resort. Students who are not STEM or math science people will choose literature and teaching. I think I'm in this moral dilemma where the handful of students who can't write a sentence, do I flunk them or do I give them a generous D? We don't have a C minus. To keep them off the streets. In other words, if they flunk out, then is that going to put them in a worse situation? But your question is a good one. I just think if we could find a way to pay teachers what we pay people in other professions, that it would draw the talent away from, let's say, law and business. On the other hand, you might argue that you want people who are drawn to it without the financial compensation. So, but I do think it's a problem because often the weaker students are the ones training to become teachers. And at Kean, we have an exam called the Praxis. I don't know if you have that, but the students complain that it's hard, but you have to pass both the math and the English. So there's that.
It's really surprising how this attitude to taking teaching as a profession is pretty much similar even in a country like India. Like
it's similar?
Yeah, it's pretty much just the same.
Really? I always
like
think
if I tell somebody I am a professor or I've taken up teaching as a profession, like many years ago when I took teaching as a profession, so they would assume that I was not good at my studies. I was not good at schoolwork. Seriously.
Oh, I think we have that less for professors, more. So we're training our students to go off and teach anything from grammar school, middle school, high school, and then the best, of course, go on to be professors. So I don't think here we have that attitude about professors, but we do have it about teachers. Yeah.
We have it more for teachers, less for professors. But still, it is considered to be a last resort in many ways. If you are a good student, then you should be doing something else than being a professor.
That's interesting. Okay.
In Ireland, the perception of what people think a university professor is so different from the reality. The truth is that most of us are working short-term contracts for a couple of hours a semester and getting badly paid. Whereas what most people think is that we're all getting paid extremely well to sit around in our offices and write articles these days, which unfortunately we don't get to do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't personally see how it's possible to grade, 80 papers every other week and write articles. So basically the summer becomes that time to do other work. Yeah.
You teach courses based on the Armenian genocide at Kean's graduate program, and your latest play, Dreams on Fire, explores the transmission of trauma through the Armenian genocide. Can you talk about why this is such a source of interest for you and how your students respond to the class?
So I was actually asked by the university to teach the Armenian genocide because we have a master's in Holocaust and genocide studies. And I am certainly not a scholar in the field. My brother, who teaches at Colgate, however, is. And so I asked him for the readings, and I became interested in it because my grandmother in 1915, when the genocide happened, lost her family. When she watched her family murdered, actually, in what was then the Ottoman Empire, and she escaped and made her way, from there to France and France to the US. So when my eldest brother learned about this, he wrote a memoir about discovering the Armenian genocide. So it's the first genocide of the 20th century, 1.5 million Armenians killed by the Turks, and the Turks continue to deny it. So I was asked to teach it. There was this deep family connection, which when my grandmother arrived in the country, she filed a claim against the Turkish government for all her losses, including family members, and nothing came of it. And then I set out to write a play, and I couldn't explain it, but genocidal stuff kept coming up. And it was a play about a college student struggling with anxiety and depression, and somehow there were like flashes of genocidal stuff came in. So I kind of had two plays that I had to weld together, and over a couple summers, that's what I worked on. And I don't know if it's successful at this point, but I sent it off to, there's a contest at Yale, which is kind of like a lottery. And then the Manhattan Theater Club has a special contest for plays that deal with scientific issues. And in this case, it's epigenetics. It's the transmission of trauma across generations. So the young man in the play slowly comes to realize that his grandmother's trauma has made its way into him. And then what was the third? Oh, and then I applied for a New Jersey grant to see if I could maybe do a little production of it. But the frustrating part is that campus, you would think you have college students, you have all the facilities, but they want to do their own productions. They don't want to do faculty place. So I'm going to see if I can get it together somewhere. I don't know.
Well, definitely keep an eye on it. And can I ask then about how you teach that course? Do you come at it from a how it's reflected in culture point of view, or do you go towards a history?
It's mostly a history class. It really is. And students, it's a graduate seminar, so students present the issues in the Armenian genocide based on what scholars have said. And so it's truly a history course.
Your concern for students' mental health is obvious given the number of works you've dedicated to beginning a discussion about depression among students, including your own film script, Everyone's Depressed. Can you talk about practical things educators can do to support their students' mental health and also help themselves in the process? Because statistics prove that a lot of scholars, PhD students, educators are also very depressed.
Yeah, I'm equally interested in anxiety too. So what we could do, so I'm going to propose, even as we speak today, I'm going to be in touch with the GE, the General Education Coordinator, for integrating readings. And you can't do that much because there's only, 12 weeks? So maybe at least a week. 2 books come to mind but again, these are nonfiction. So Scott Stossel has a book called The Age of Anxiety, which I researched when I was working on the play. And then Andrew Solomon has a book. It's also nonfiction. Is it called An Atlas on Depression? And then William Styron, of course, has his great book, Darkness Visible. And that's a short one. So that one would really be good for students. It's concise. So I think bringing it, there's my dilemma. I'll throw this out to you. I can either propose a whole course that deals with these issues, consisting of films like Cuckoo's Nest and Sylvia Plath, and make a whole course out of it. Or I can, which means you would get upper level and fewer students, or I can fold it into pre-existing courses like our general ed course. You have any thoughts there?
I was just curious as well. Our students, I've only been teaching for just under 4 years, but I've noticed students are becoming much more, almost year on year, students are becoming much more able to talk about their mental health and willing to do so in class and in emails. What do you do to support students in that, or to help them get through it when they express mental health issues with you?
Yeah. So, of course, you don't want it to replace class time. So I always tell them to come and see me during office hours. So, class should be, we're talking about the readings. So I urge them to come in over, and I love to have tea for them and sit and talk. Some of them are not inclined to do that. And we always have on our syllabus, the counseling center, I think, is now open 24/7. So I'm glad that mental health has become less stigmatized. I still think students feel uncomfortable. But I think, right, your generation is far ahead of where my generation was. So that's a good thing. But yeah, between counseling center, personal office visits, include maybe one reading if you're doing a GE course, or if it pairs with a literary reading, then integrate either one on depression, anxiety. There's so many different areas.
Right. Absolutely. I love that. Just kind of make it a part of the course and not kind of shun away from it. And finally, I'm curious, what do you think the future of university education will be? Will we be doing online or even blended for the foreseeable future? And what other non-COVID related changes do you envisage?
Oh, well, I'm not a tech person, so I'm longing to return to the classroom. And I think the classroom will never disappear. I think students like the social aspect of universities. What does concern me is the disappearance of full-time tenure-track faculty. And that must be resumed. Otherwise, we have a skeleton of a university. So I feel that universities need to invest in people, not in buildings, not in everything else. So that must happen.
So yeah, that was our conversation with Jan Balakian, and I really like Jan for her teaching methodology and also for her overall emphasis on students' mental health. I think you agree with me, Kieran, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so much more important now than ever to consider the stresses students are going to be under. And I also liked how she didn't rely on technology for teaching. I think online teaching hopefully will pass, and it's important for us to remember that technology can't save us from any teaching issues we might have.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was our second episode of the Arthur Miller Society podcast. You can listen to the podcast on Spotify or Google us to find your preferred player.
Follow the Arthur Miller Society on Facebook and Twitter, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Thanks so much for listening.